What if the very thing you're most ashamed of is the key to understanding who you really are? You hide it. You suppress it. You try to fight it. But still, the fantasy comes back. Not because you're twisted, not because you're dirty, but because something inside you is trying to speak. Carl Jung believed that whatever we repress doesn't just disappear, it returns as a symbol. And few things reveal the unconscious more clearly than our sexual fantasies. They are not simply about pleasure, they are coded messages, mirrors of the pain we never dared to name. Most people try to fix their desire by controlling it. They moralize it, spiritualize it, or numb it. But what if the real path to freedom was not suppression, but understanding? Because beneath your fantasies are not sins, but symbols. And behind those symbols is a wound, one that never stopped bleeding. One that shaped how you see love, how you chase connection, how you fear abandonment. The fantasy is not the problem. It is the map. In this video, we will decode what your fantasies are really trying to tell you. Not to shame you, but to free you. Because when you finally stop judging your desire and start listening to it, you discover something surprising. Your desire never wanted to destroy you. It wanted to return you to yourself. And that journey begins now. Sexual fantasies often carry a quiet shame. You may not speak of them. You may not even fully allow yourself to feel them. But they persist, like whispers in the dark, calling from a place you've forgotten. Not because they are evil, but because they are honest. Carl Jung taught us that the psyche speaks in symbols, not straight lines. Desire, in his view, was rarely about the literal object. It was about what that object represented. The urge isn't about the act. It's about the story beneath it, the emotional imprint we carry from childhood. When someone fantasizes about being overpowered or dominated, it might not be about violence at all. It could be a deep craving to surrender control, to finally feel safe enough to stop holding everything together. Because maybe, for too long, they were the ones who had to stay strong. When someone imagines being relentlessly desired, obsessed over, wanted without limits, it's not always about lust. It might be a wounded part of them saying, "Please, for once, want me so much that you'll never leave." These fantasies do not make you broken. They make you human. They are emotional metaphors, not moral failures. And the more shame we pile on top, the more distorted they become. Jung believed that the unconscious finds a way to express what consciousness cannot accept. If you repress your longing, it does not vanish. It finds new forms. Sometimes in dreams, sometimes in compulsions, and often in the most intimate corners of your imagination. What if fantasy is your soul's way of reaching through the noise, a secret language for the parts of you that were never allowed to speak? The child who never felt chosen, the lover who always had to earn affection, the self who was taught that desire equals danger. In the eyes of depth psychology, fantasy isn't something to fix. It's something to listen to. Because behind every fantasy is a fragment of truth, a buried memory, an unmet need, a silenced plea. It is never random. It is always a reflection. Think of it like a dream. Would you punish yourself for dreaming something strange? Or would you ask, what part of me needed this image? What pain is trying to surface? The same compassion must apply to desire, because desire, like the dream, is symbolic. It is the emotional echo of what still lives within. In this light, your fantasies become less about sin and more about signal. They don't define your character. They reveal your inner landscape. They say, here is the part of you that still aches. Here is the part that wants to be seen. You don't need to act on every fantasy to honor it, but you do need to recognize what it's pointing toward. Because what you repress doesn't disappear. It simply finds another door. The moment you stop seeing your desires as a flaw and begin seeing them as symbols, you take the first step toward healing the deeper story inside you. And that's where we go next. Some fantasies aren't about control. They're about being wanted. Fully, completely, obsessively. Not for what you do, not for how you look, but for simply existing. Because deep down, you still wonder if you were ever truly enough. Many people carry a hidden wound, the wound of not being chosen. Maybe it was a parent who never looked your way. Maybe it was a love who only stayed when you performed. That wound becomes a lens, and through that lens, desire is reshaped. You might fantasize about someone who pursues you relentlessly, someone who sees you across a crowded room and needs you, not just sexually, but emotionally, spiritually, as if you are the missing piece of their being. Because there's a younger version of you still whispering, "Please choose me." Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The fantasies we have are often rehearsals for something we never received. They are the inner child's attempt to reverse the rejection, to feel powerful where we once felt invisible. You may crave intensity because no one ever stayed long enough to make you feel safe. You may long for obsession because your needs were always too much for others. So your fantasy becomes a stage where you're finally adored without limits. But what it really reveals is the emptiness of love that came with conditions. Many people don't recognize that this is what their body is trying to say. They think their desires are shameful or too much. But the desire isn't the problem. The rejection underneath it is. Fantasy becomes a substitute for the safety you never had. A place where someone finally sees you, not as a burden, not as a task, but as a soul. Someone who won't turn away when you cry, or shrink when you need too much. Someone who won't leave just because you're hard to love. That's why so many people become attached to erotic imagination, not for the sex, but for the emotional restoration it represents. It's a simulation of connection, of being pursued, of being seen. And often, it's the only place where those things feel reachable. But the more we run toward the fantasy, the more we run away from the wound. And the wound doesn't disappear when ignored. It deepens. It wants to be felt, not covered in projection. Because only when we touch the grief can we begin to rewrite the need. The truth is, your desire to be wanted is not shameful. It is a holy ache, a trace of the love you were meant to receive but never did. And your fantasy is not a betrayal of God, or virtue, or self-worth. It is your soul's final attempt to say, "Please come find me. I'm still here." You don't need to destroy the fantasy. You need to trace it back to the original heartbreak. The moment you first learned that love was conditional and connection was not safe. Because the only way to transform desire is to bring the wound into the light. And when you begin to do that, when you stop escaping through your fantasies and start listening to what they reveal, you'll realize something profound. You don't want to be wanted by everyone. You just want to feel wanted enough to be real. And that's where the healing begins. Not all fantasies are about being loved. Some are about power, domination, submission, control. These are the ones that make people pause, question themselves, feel conflicted. Why would I want to overpower someone? Why would I want to be used or humiliated? It seems dark, strange, even shameful. But in the realm of the unconscious, these desires are never random. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the social mask we wear. But behind it lives the shadow, everything we repress, disown, or fear. Sexual fantasies often give the shadow a stage. Not because it wants to harm, but because it wants to be acknowledged. When you fantasize about dominating someone, it doesn't mean you want to cause pain. It might mean you're trying to reclaim power in a life where you were constantly silenced, dismissed, or controlled. For those who were once voiceless, the fantasy of control can feel like redemption, not because they enjoy cruelty, but because deep down, they still feel small, and they're trying to reverse that narrative. And if your fantasy is to be controlled, to be tied, taken, told what to do, that too has meaning. It may not be about passivity. It may be a longing to finally let go of the pressure to always be in control. Some people had to grow up too fast. They were the caretakers, the peacekeepers, the ones who kept everyone safe. So they never learned how to feel held. Now, fantasy becomes the only space where surrender feels safe. Jung would say, these fantasies are ego masks. They aren't true reflections of your soul. They're expressions of what's missing. Masks your psyche wears to act out a scene that was never allowed to happen in real life. Because the ego wants to feel powerful, not to dominate others, but to protect itself from the terror of being weak again. The fantasy becomes armor, and the sexual stage becomes the only space where the armor can come off or tighten. You may think you are turned on by the act, but what you're really drawn to is the symbolism beneath it. Dominance may symbolize safety. Submission may symbolize release. This is not about who you are in the bedroom. This is about who you've had to become, just to survive the pain. And in fantasy, that identity finally gets to shift, even if just for a moment. The mistake is thinking these fantasies define you. They don't. They reveal what the ego is trying to manage. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of being powerless. Fear of being exposed. Some fantasies are loud because the wounds are loud. Others are quiet, hiding behind roles, masks, preferences. But underneath every dynamic of power is a story of how power was once taken away from you. And when you begin to see that, when you stop asking, what's wrong with me, and start asking, what is this protecting me from, that's when fantasy becomes medicine, not a trap. You're not broken for craving power. You're not weak for craving surrender. You're simply trying to rewrite a script that once left you feeling small, helpless, or alone. And as we'll see next, not all fantasies are about pain or control. Some are about something even deeper, the longing for union. Some fantasies are not about control, they're about merging, about dissolving into someone so fully that the lines between you blur. Not just bodies, but spirits, emotions, and identities. You don't just want touch. You want to be known, fully, without hiding. To be seen in your rawest form and not be left. To feel like you are no longer separate, no longer alone. Carl Jung believed in the concept of the anima and animus, the inner feminine in men, and the inner masculine in women. We are always seeking the missing part of ourselves, and often we project it onto others, lovers, muses, fantasies, not because they are the answer, but because they hold the symbol of what we've lost. Fantasies of union are not only about passion, they are about wholeness. They emerge when we feel fragmented inside, when we've split parts of ourselves just to survive. And now, the soul is longing for reintegration. That's why you might dream of someone who just gets you. No explanation, no performance. Someone who sees the part of you that even you abandoned. Because somewhere inside, you still believe, if someone truly knows me, I will be healed. But here's the truth Jung would offer, that someone you seek out there is often a projection of the part of you that you've lost. The fantasy becomes a mirror, reflecting the inner union your soul is aching for. Sometimes, the sexual desire is not about the other person at all. It's about a return to something sacred inside you, a longing to reconnect with your intuition, your softness, your courage, your voice. The part you silenced when the world taught you to survive, not to feel. We confuse this with falling in love. We chase partner after partner, hoping to feel complete. But the ache remains, not because they failed you, but because no one can fill in for your lost self. The fantasy of union is not about finding the one. It's about becoming one, inside, balancing your inner masculine and feminine, holding your own chaos and clarity in the same breath. You might picture someone wrapping you in warmth, looking into your eyes, saying, I see you. You are safe. But what if that is your own soul speaking, asking to be welcomed back after years of rejection? When we lose connection with the soul, the body becomes louder, trying to compensate. Desire becomes the voice of grief, not just for love, but for the truth of who we were before the world told us to hide. That's why these fantasies feel spiritual, because they are your soul trying to remember what it feels like to be whole. Not touched, but known. Not claimed, but met. And until you learn to meet yourself that way, until you begin the process of inner reunion, no fantasy, no person, no experience will ever truly satisfy you. Because what you crave isn't pleasure, it's belonging to yourself. That's why the next step is not escape, but integration. Learning to hear what your fantasy is trying to restore, not to shame it, but to follow it back to the part of you it's trying to bring home. You cannot heal what you refuse to look at, and you cannot integrate a shadow you still call shame. Most people try to fix their fantasies by silencing them, but silence is not healing. It's just another form of rejection. Carl Jung taught that the shadow is not evil. It is simply the part of you that was never allowed to exist in the light. Your sexual shadow holds the wounds, the longings, the fears you've buried, and the fantasy is its language. Integration begins with honesty, not indulgence, not suppression, but honest, quiet curiosity. You sit with the image that unsettles you and ask, what are you trying to say? Write it down. Describe it. Not to judge, but to observe. Let it speak without interruption. You might be surprised by what comes up when you listen without fear. Maybe the fantasy is about surrender, but when you follow the thread deeper, you find it's not about giving your body away, it's about giving your heart a place to rest. Maybe the fantasy is dark, intense, overwhelming, but underneath the surface, you find a powerless child who never had a say. You're not broken for imagining it. You're broken because no one ever held that child's pain. Integration means asking yourself, who in me is craving this? What part of my story is still frozen in time? Not every fantasy is meant to be acted on, but every fantasy is meant to be understood. You can learn to hold both, the desire and the grief behind it. You can sit with your hunger and ask, where were you born? And little by little, the fantasy becomes less about escape and more about truth. This work takes courage, because the deeper you go, the more you'll find not lust, but loneliness, not pleasure, but pain, asking to be witnessed. And if you stay with it long enough, the image begins to change. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When you face your fantasies with awareness, you don't become more dangerous, you become more whole. The shame loosens, the compulsions soften, and the fantasy becomes a message, not a master. A map, not a cage. Integration is not a single moment, it is a quiet practice. A sacred space you create within, where no part of you is cast out, where the voice that once whispered in secret can now speak in safety, and where your desire becomes a doorway, not a wall. You're not here to destroy your fantasies. You're here to decode them, to see what they reveal about your unmet needs, your early pain, your forgotten power. Because only when you know what your shadow holds, can you offer it the light. And the light you give yourself is the one no one else ever could. Healing begins when you stop pretending your desire doesn't exist. When you stop fighting it like an enemy and start treating it like a forgotten child. Because the truth is, your desire has always been your guide. It only turned dark when you ignored its voice. Wholeness doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop fearing what you feel. And that includes the ache, the longing, the strange and sacred pull toward what you don't fully understand. It includes the parts of you that still hunger, even after being fed. Carl Jung didn't ask people to become pure. He asked them to become integrated, to bring together light and shadow, strength and softness, instinct and awareness. Because to be whole is not to be perfect. It is to be honest. Many people chase spiritual paths that deny the body. They escape into silence, prayer, or discipline, thinking this will make them clean. But the soul doesn't want to be clean. The soul wants to be complete. And to be complete, you must own the part of you that still dreams in secret. The one that imagines closeness, chaos, surrender, power. Not to indulge it blindly, but to honor what it reveals. Because what you avoid will control you. What you name will free you. You don't need to confess your desires to the world, but you do need to stop hiding them from yourself. Because the moment you tell yourself the truth, not in shame, but in gentleness, something shifts. You stop chasing intensity and begin seeking intimacy. You stop performing and start connecting. Your fantasy doesn't vanish, but it softens. It no longer screams. It begins to speak. And in that space, you can ask, what did I lose that this fantasy keeps trying to restore? You might find the answer is not lust, but something deeper: belonging, safety, tenderness, or freedom. True freedom is not the absence of desire. It's the presence of self-awareness. It's being able to feel a longing without letting it rule you. To be able to say, I see you. I know what you're looking for. And I've got you now. Your desire is not your weakness. It is your compass. When met with consciousness, it leads you not into destruction, but into the places that still need your love. Wholeness doesn't mean your fantasies disappear. It means they no longer own you. You walk beside them, not beneath them. You become the container, not the chaos. This is what it means to grow. To stop hiding from your inner world. To stop judging the parts of you that learn to speak through symbols. And to start listening, not with fear, but with grace. Because in the end, desire isn't just about pleasure. It's about connection. To yourself, to others, and to the parts of you that have waited years to be seen. And when you walk toward that connection with eyes wide open, you finally become what you were always meant to be. Whole. You were never meant to carry this in silence. Not your fantasies, not your longings, not your shame. They were never signs of sin. They were signs of a soul that remembers what wholeness feels like. And even now, beneath everything you've survived, that part of you is still there, still reaching, still waiting to be reclaimed. Your fantasies are not flaws. They are emotional maps, pointing you back to the places within you that need love, not judgment. You do not have to act them out to heal, but you do need to stop pretending they don't matter. Because they do. They reveal the deepest truth about your unmet needs, your emotional wounds, and your forgotten worth. If this video helped you feel seen in any way, if it touched something you've kept hidden for too long, let that be a step, not toward more hiding, but toward healing. Leave a comment. Tell your truth, even if just a few words. You're not alone. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone silently carrying shame they never chose, share this with them. Be the reminder that they are not broken, just becoming whole. Subscribe if you want to keep walking deeper into truth, healing, and the mystery of the soul. Here, we don't shame the shadow. We listen to it and let it lead us back to light. Thank you for being here. Your courage to explore your inner world is the beginning of everything.